The phone buzzed at 2 in the morning, and I knew before I even looked at the screen that it was her, my mother, Evelyn. The message was short, brutal in its casualness. "You should thank me. Now he'll learn to respect what's valuable." I stared at those words until they blurred, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. In the next room, my 6-year-old son Ethan was finally asleep after hours of crying, his small arm wrapped in gauze, the angry red burns underneath a reminder of what my mother had done. She had rubbed chili oil into his skin because he touched her expensive moisturizer, because he was curious, because he was 6. If you're hearing this story and thinking, how could anyone do that to a child, please hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I'm about to tell you is how I took back control from the most toxic person in my life. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to cut off a family member for your own sanity. Trust me, you're not alone. But let me take you back to where this nightmare actually began. Let me tell you how I ended up in that hospital room, how I went from being a daughter desperate for her mother's approval to a woman who finally said enough. 3 months earlier, I had been sitting in my cramped apartment on the wrong side of town, the kind of place where the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbors arguing about money at midnight. I was holding my phone, staring at a message from Evelyn that had come in an hour before. I'd read it 17 times, counting, because I had this habit of reading her messages over and over like I could decode some hidden warmth in them if I just looked hard enough. The message said, "Bring Ethan over for lunch Sunday. It's been too long. He needs his grandmother. A family is not complete when a child doesn't know where he comes from." The last sentence made my stomach clench. It was so perfectly Evelyn. A statement that sounded loving on the surface but carried the weight of accusation underneath. She was saying I was keeping Ethan from her. She was saying I was breaking apart our family. She was saying, without saying it directly, that I was a bad daughter and a worse mother. I looked over at Ethan, who was sprawled on our threadbare carpet, completely absorbed in building an elaborate city out of his toy cars and blocks. He was making engine noises, moving a red convertible along an imaginary highway. His dark hair, the same color as mine, fell into his eyes and he pushed it back with his left hand, unconsciously, naturally. That left hand. God, my mother hated that left hand. The last time we'd visited, 6 months ago, she'd spent the entire afternoon trying to force Ethan to use his right hand instead. She'd moved his cup to the right side of the table. She'd placed his crayons on the right. She'd even gone so far as to gently slap his left hand away when he reached for something, saying in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted to sound patient, "No, sweetheart, use the right one." The correct one. Ethan had looked at me with confusion in his eyes, not understanding why Grandma kept stopping him from doing things the way that felt natural. I'd tried to intervene gently, saying, "Mom, there's nothing wrong with being left-handed. Lots of people are." She'd given me that look, the one I'd seen my entire childhood. The look that said I was disappointing her yet again. "Lots of people are also uneducated, Sarah. That doesn't mean we celebrate it. He needs to learn to adapt. The world isn't built for left-handed people. You're not doing him any favors by letting him be different." I'd spent the car ride home apologizing to Ethan, telling him there was absolutely nothing wrong with him, that being left-handed was perfectly normal and even special. He'd seemed okay, resilient in that way kids are, but I'd lain awake that night wondering if I should just stop taking him to see her. Wondering if the damage of having a critical grandmother was worse than having no grandmother at all, but then the guilt would creep in. The guilt that had been planted in me since childhood and had roots so deep I didn't know how to pull them out. She's your mother. She's his grandmother. Family is supposed to stick together. Maybe if you just tried harder, explained things better, she'd understand. Maybe she'd change. So here I was, 3 months later, staring at another invitation, feeling that same sick mixture of obligation and dread. I texted back, "We'll be there at noon." Her response came immediately, like she'd been waiting. "Good. Wear something presentable. And make sure Ethan's clothes match. First impressions matter, even for family." I looked down at my worn Target jeans and clearance rack sweater. Nothing I owned would ever be presentable enough for Evelyn, but I'd try anyway, because that's what I always did. That Sunday morning, I woke up at 6 even though we didn't need to leave until 11. I couldn't sleep, my stomach already churning with anxiety. I went through Ethan's entire wardrobe, which wasn't extensive, trying to find an outfit that would pass my mother's inspection. I finally settled on a button-down shirt I'd found at a thrift store for $3. It was light blue, barely worn, and when I'd seen it on the rack, I thought it looked expensive. I'd washed it 3 times to make sure it was perfectly clean, and I'd ironed it the night before, going over every wrinkle twice. For myself, I chose black slacks I'd worn to a job interview 2 years ago and a cream-colored blouse that I usually saved for parent-teacher conferences. I put on makeup, more than I normally wore, trying to hide the dark circles that came from working double shifts at the medical office where I was a receptionist. At 10:30, I called Ethan in from playing outside. He was covered in dirt from digging in the small patch of yard behind our apartment building, looking for worms. He'd been showing them to me all morning, his face bright with discovery, asking me questions about how they breathed underground and whether they had families. "Time to get cleaned up, buddy. We're going to Grandma's house." His face fell slightly. The worm curiosity vanished, replaced with something more guarded. "Do we have to?" The question broke my heart. "Yes, sweetie. It'll be okay. It's just for a few hours." He didn't argue, but he didn't smile either. He just trudged inside to take a bath, his small shoulders already carrying a tension that no 6-year-old should have to feel. While he was in the tub, I called my best friend Rachel. I needed someone to talk me out of the panic that was building in my chest. She answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you're not going." "I have to, Rach. She's his grandmother." "Sarah." Rachel's voice was firm. "She made him cry last time. She told him he was eating wrong, holding his fork wrong, walking wrong. She criticized everything about him for 3 solid hours. I know, but maybe if I prepare him better this time. Maybe if I talk to her beforehand and set some boundaries." Rachel sighed, and I could picture her shaking her head. "How many times have you tried to set boundaries with her? How many times has she actually respected them?" I didn't have an answer to that. Or rather, I had an answer, but I didn't want to say it out loud. 0. The answer was 0 times. "Just be careful, okay?" Rachel said finally. "And if anything feels wrong, leave. You don't owe her anything." But I felt like I did. I felt like I owed her everything. She'd raised me alone after my father left when I was 3. She'd worked long hours to keep a roof over our heads, to maintain the lifestyle she thought we deserved. She'd sacrificed, she always reminded me, so much for me. The least I could do was show up for Sunday lunch. Ethan emerged from the bathroom, his hair still damp, and I helped him into the thrift store shirt and his nicest pair of pants. He looked so handsome, so grown up, and I felt a surge of fierce, protective love. "Remember?" I said, kneeling down to his eye level. "We're going to use our best manners today, okay? And if Grandma says anything that makes you feel bad, I want you to tell me right away." "Okay, Mommy." But I saw the resignation in his eyes. He was 6 years old, and he already knew that telling me wouldn't necessarily change anything. The drive to my mother's house took 40 minutes, cutting through neighborhoods that got progressively nicer the farther we went. The apartment complexes gave way to houses with yards, which gave way to houses with bigger yards and 2-car garages, which finally gave way to my mother's neighborhood where the houses had names instead of just addresses. Colonials, Victorians, restored farmhouses on manicured 2-acre lots. My mother's house was a white colonial, with black shutters and a wraparound porch that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The lawn was chemically green, cut in precise diagonal lines. There were flower beds bursting with tulips and daffodils, clearly professionally maintained. 2 expensive German cars sat in the circular driveway, one hers and one that belonged to whoever she was dating this month. I pulled my beat-up Honda Civic in next to her Mercedes and immediately felt like I was parking a child's toy next to a real car. "It's so big," Ethan whispered, staring up at the house. "Grandma likes nice things," I said, which was the understatement of the century. Before we even made it up the front walk, the door opened and there she was. Evelyn Hartwell, 57 years old but could pass for 45 thanks to regular Botox appointments and a personal trainer. She was wearing white linen pants and a silk blouse in pale pink, her blonde hair styled in that casual but clearly expensive way that rich women seem to achieve effortlessly. Her makeup was perfect, her jewelry understated, but I knew that each piece cost more than my monthly rent. "There you are," she said, not quite smiling. Her eyes swept over me in one quick, assessing glance, and I saw the familiar flicker of disappointment. "Still dressing like you're in college, I see. Those pants are at least 3 seasons old." "Hi, Mom." I forced myself to smile, to not react to the criticism that had been delivered before I'd even crossed the threshold. Her gaze moved to Ethan, and her expression softened slightly, though there was still something calculating in it. "And here's my grandson. Come give Grandma a hug." Ethan walked forward obediently, and she bent down, pulling him into an embrace that looked warm but I could see was just a little too tight, lasting just a little too long. When she pulled back, she pinched his cheek hard, and I saw him wince. My goodness, you're getting so big. Are you being a good boy for your mother? Yes, Grandma. I hope so. She stood up, still holding onto his shoulder with a grip that looked casual but I knew was firm. Your mother needs all the help she can get. Single parenting is so difficult, especially when you don't have the resources to provide properly. There it was. Less than 60 seconds in, and she'd already managed to criticize my parenting, my financial situation, and my choice to raise Ethan without his father, who'd left when I was 4 months pregnant. It was almost impressive how quickly she could land her verbal strikes. We're doing fine, Mom. Of course you are, darling. She ushered us inside, her perfume overwhelming in the small entryway. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying it must be hard, living in that tiny apartment, working that dead-end job. But you're doing the best you can with what you have. The house was exactly as I remembered it, immaculate and cold. Everything had its place. The entry hall had a marble table with an elaborate flower arrangement that I knew was changed weekly. The living room beyond was decorated in whites and creams, with furniture that looked beautiful but uncomfortable. There were porcelain figurines on every surface, expensive art on the walls, fresh flowers in crystal vases. Ethan's eyes went wide, taking it all in. I could see the wonder on his face at all the beautiful, shiny things. But I could also see the anxiety as he became aware of his own small body in this space full of fragile, expensive objects. Can I look around? He asked quietly. Of course, sweetheart, my mother said before I could answer. Just be careful. Everything in this house is very valuable, not like the plastic toys you have at home. These are real antiques, real art. They need to be treated with respect. Ethan nodded seriously, and I watched as he moved into the living room, his hands clasped behind his back, looking but not touching. My heart ached watching him police his own natural curiosity, making himself small and careful in a space that should have felt welcoming. He's very cautious, my mother observed, following my gaze. Too cautious for a boy his age. Boys should be bold, confident. Are you sure you're not coddling him too much? I'm teaching him to be respectful, I said, my jaw tight. There's a difference between respect and timidity, Sarah. She walked toward the kitchen, expecting me to follow. I worry that you're raising him to be soft. The world isn't kind to soft men. I followed her, biting back the dozen responses that rose in my throat. This was how it always was with her. A constant stream of criticism disguised as concern, opinions presented as facts, judgments wrapped in the language of caring. The kitchen was enormous, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that probably cost more than I made in a year. She'd set the table in the adjoining dining room, and I could see she'd used her good china, the set with the gold rim that she'd inherited from her own mother. I made chicken, she announced. Organic, free range. I know you probably can't afford that kind of quality, so I thought this would be a nice treat for Ethan. Growing boys need proper nutrition. Thank you, I managed. That's very thoughtful. She turned to face me, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. You look tired, Sarah. Are you sleeping enough? Getting enough vitamins? You need to take care of yourself. No one's going to do it for you. Certainly not any man. You saw to that when you chased Ethan's father away. I didn't chase him away, I said quietly. He left. Well, she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. Men don't leave unless they have a reason. But that's ancient history now. No point dwelling on your mistakes. I felt the familiar sting of tears and blinked them back hard. I would not cry. I would not give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten to me. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion around my mother was a weakness she would exploit. Why don't you go check on Ethan? She said, her tone making it clear it wasn't a suggestion. Make sure he's not getting into anything he shouldn't. Lunch will be ready in 10 minutes. I escaped to the living room, my shoulders finally dropping from the rigid tension I'd been holding. Ethan was standing motionless in front of the mahogany bookshelf, his small body perfectly still as he examined the leather-bound spines. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back, like a museum visitor afraid to trigger an alarm. When he heard my footsteps, he turned, and the relief that flooded his face broke my heart. He reached for me immediately, and I took his hand, his small fingers gripping mine with an urgency that spoke volumes. I knelt down to his level. You're doing so good, buddy, I whispered, brushing his hair back from his forehead. I'm so proud of how careful you're being. Just hang in there a little bit longer, okay? He nodded, but his eyes told a different story. They held the same haunted look I remembered seeing in mirrors throughout my own childhood. That hypervigilance, that constant internal monitoring, that bone-deep fear of putting a foot wrong. I watched him glance nervously toward the kitchen, then back at the beautiful forbidden objects surrounding us. This was her gift, I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach. My mother had this talent for making you feel like you were standing on the edge of a cliff, like one misstep would send you tumbling into her disappointment. And now she was teaching that same fear to my son. In just 2 hours, she'd already gotten into his head. "Lunch is served," my mother announced from the dining room, her voice bright and hostess perfect. We walked in together, Ethan's hand still gripping mine. The dining room table was set like something from a magazine, each piece of china placed with geometric precision, the silverware lined up exactly parallel to the edge of the table. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier overhead. Everything was perfect, pristine, and completely unwelcoming. As soon as we sat down, I reached for Ethan's plate. The chicken breast was still whole, and I knew from experience that it would be tough for his small hands to cut through. I picked up the knife and began slicing it into bite-sized pieces, arranging them neatly so he could easily spear them with his fork. It was something I'd always done, part of our mealtime routine since he'd graduated from high chair to table. Some might call it babying, but I called it being a mother to a 6-year-old. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She set it down with a sharp clink against the china, her eyes fixed on my hands as I continued cutting. "Sarah," her voice cut through the quiet dining room. "What are you doing?" "I'm cutting his chicken." I didn't look up, focusing on making the pieces uniform. "I can see that. The question is why. He's 6 years old, not 2. He has hands, he has a knife. He's 6, Mom." I kept my voice carefully neutral, though I could feel the familiar tightness building in my chest. "It's a little tough for him to cut through." "Exactly my point." She picked up her wine glass, took a deliberate sip, then set it down with precision. "When you were 6, you were cutting your own meat. You were making your own breakfast. You were doing your own laundry. I didn't hover over you, treating you like a helpless infant. That's because you made me grow up too fast," I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I just continued cutting, each slice of the knife a small act of rebellion. "Independence doesn't just magically appear, Sarah." My mother's voice shifted into that particular register I'd heard countless times throughout my childhood, the one that signaled an incoming lecture. It was a tone that somehow managed to be both syrupy, sweet, and razor-sharp at the same time. The kind of voice that made you feel small and stupid before you even understood what you'd done wrong. It has to be taught. She emphasized each word, as if I were too slow to grasp basic concepts. It has to be modeled. It has to be insisted upon. She picked up her knife and fork, cutting her own chicken with exaggerated precision, as if demonstrating the proper technique to a classroom of incompetent students. Children don't wake up one morning and suddenly know how to function in the world. They need structure. They need expectations. They need consequences when they fail to meet those expectations. She paused to take a bite, chewing slowly, deliberately making me wait for the rest of her judgment. "What you're doing right now," she continued, gesturing at Ethan's plate with her fork, "isn't love. It's enabling. It's teaching him learned helplessness. Do you know what that is? It's a psychological term for when someone becomes so accustomed to having things done for them that they stop even trying to do things themselves. They literally learn to be helpless. Is that what you want for your son?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she steamrolled right over me. "Every single time you do something for him that he should be doing himself, you are crippling him." Her voice rose slightly, each word sharpening. "You might think you're helping, but what you're really doing is telling him he's incompetent. That he can't handle something as simple as cutting his own food." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine. "Think about it, Sarah. What happens when he starts 1st grade next month and sits in that cafeteria? The lunch lady isn't going to cut his chicken nuggets. He'll sit there, helpless, while every other 6-year-old manages just fine. And you know what happens then?" She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "He gets laughed at. The other children will point and whisper, 'Poor Ethan needs his mommy to do everything for him. Is he a baby?' That's what they'll say." Her finger tapped the table, punctuating each word. "And he'll blame you, Sarah, not himself. He'll resent you for making him different, for setting him up to fail in front of his peers. Every moment of humiliation will be on you. That will be your legacy as a mother. Not love, not protection, just shame and inadequacy." "Mom," I started, but she held up one perfectly manicured hand. "I'm not finished." She set down her utensils and folded her hands on the table, looking at me with that expression of profound disappointment I knew so intimately. You think you're being kind. You think you're being nurturing. But what you're actually doing is teaching him that the world will bend to accommodate his limitations, that someone will always swoop in to rescue him from challenges. That effort and struggle are unnecessary because mommy will fix everything. Her voice dripped with condescension on the word mommy. And when he gets out into the real world, into a world that does not care about his feelings or his comfort, he is going to crumble. He is going to fail. Because you never taught him how to handle difficulty. You never taught him resilience. You never taught him that sometimes things are hard, and you do them anyway. She picked up her wine glass, took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving my face. I see it already, you know. She set the glass down with a soft clink. The way he clings to you. The way he looks to you for permission before doing anything. The way he flinches at the slightest correction. You're raising him to be weak, Sarah. To be soft. To be one of those men who falls apart the first time life gets difficult. And there are already so many of those in the world. She shook her head slowly, as if mourning some great tragedy. I raised you to be strong. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe you resented me for it. But look at you now. You survived. You're functional. You're raising a child on your own. That strength didn't come from coddling. It came from being forced to develop a spine. Her words hung in the air like poison, seeping into every corner of the room. Each sentence was carefully constructed to sound reasonable, to sound like wisdom, to make me doubt everything I knew about being a good mother. It was her special talent, making cruelty sound like concern, making control sound like guidance, making abuse sound like love. I'm teaching him that his mother loves him and wants to help him, I said quietly, finishing with the chicken and setting down the knife. No. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes hard. You're teaching him that he doesn't have to try, that someone will always be there to do the hard things for him. And when he gets out into the real world and realizes that's not true, he'll crumble. She paused, letting her words sink in. Or in your case, she added, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile, forced. I had to force you to be independent because you would have been content to stay helpless forever. At least I taught you survival skills, even if you resented me for it. The air in the room felt thick, oppressive. I could feel Ethan shrinking beside me, his small body pulling in on itself as if trying to take up less space. His eyes were downcast, staring at his plate, and I knew that tone in my mother's voice was registering to him even if he didn't fully understand the words. Children always know when adults are fighting about them. I felt my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached, but I forced myself to stay quiet. Arguing with her never worked. It never had. She would just twist everything I said, turn it back on me, make me feel like I was the unreasonable one. So I said nothing, just reached over and gave Ethan's shoulder a gentle squeeze, trying to communicate without words that he was okay, that this wasn't about him. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. I could see his chest rising and falling a little too quickly, that telltale sign that he was getting anxious. He glanced up at me with uncertain eyes, silently asking if he'd done something wrong, if this tension was somehow his fault. You're not doing him any favors by coddling him, she continued, warming to her topic. The world isn't going to cut his food for him. His teachers aren't going to baby him. His future employers certainly won't. You're setting him up for failure by doing everything for him. I'm helping him eat his lunch, not filing his tax returns. Don't be flippant. My mother's voice sharpened. This is exactly the attitude that concerns me. You treat parenting like it's all fun and games, all nurturing and gentleness. But raising a man requires discipline. Structure. High expectations. She looked pointedly at Ethan. Especially for boys. The world chews up soft men and spits them out. I finished cutting the chicken and set down the knife, my hand trembling slightly with suppressed anger. Ethan picked up his fork with his left hand, ready to start eating. I saw the moment my mother's attention locked onto it. Her eyes tracked the movement with the intensity of a predator spotting weakness in prey, her lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. The meal continued in tense silence for a few minutes. My mother asked Ethan questions about school, about his friends, about what he liked to do. He answered in short, careful sentences, and I could see him becoming more and more tense with each question. Then she said, "Why are you eating with that hand?" Ethan looked confused. My left hand? Yes. It looks sloppy. Use your right hand. But I'm left-handed, Grandma. No one is naturally left-handed, sweetheart. It's just a bad habit your mother has allowed you to develop. My mother reached across the table and gently but firmly moved Ethan's fork to his right hand. There, Use this one. Ethan tried, his movements awkward and clumsy. The fork shook in his unpracticed grip, and a piece of chicken fell off onto the plate. My mother made a tang sound. See? You need to practice. Using the correct hand is important. People judge you by these things. Mom, I said, my voice strained. He's left-handed. There's nothing wrong with that. About 10% of people are left-handed. It's completely normal. She turned her cool gaze on me. Normal doesn't mean correct, Sarah. Left-handed people struggle more in life. They have to use scissors made for right-handed people, write on desks designed for right-handed people, navigate a right-handed world. I'm trying to save him from unnecessary difficulty. But then again, you've never understood the concept of long-term thinking. I felt my face flush with anger and shame. Ethan had abandoned his fork entirely, his eyes downcast, his shoulders hunched. He looked miserable, and I'd brought him here. I'd subjected him to this. Actually, left-handed people are often more creative and artistic, I said, fighting to keep my voice even. Many famous artists, musicians, and scientists were left-handed. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Einstein. My mother waved a dismissive hand. Oh, please. You're not raising the next Einstein, Sarah. You're raising a normal little boy who needs to learn how to function in society. And part of that is conforming to basic social standards. She turned back to Ethan with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Now, try again with the right hand. You can do it if you really try. I watched as my 6-year-old son struggled to eat his lunch with the wrong hand, his face a mask of concentration and barely suppressed frustration. Every few bites, he would unconsciously switch the fork back to his left hand, and my mother would correct him, moving it back with increasing impatience. You're not even trying, she said finally. Are you always this stubborn at home, or are you just trying to embarrass your mother in front of me? Ethan's lower lip trembled. I'm sorry, Grandma. It's just hard. Hard? She laughed, a sound without warmth. Life is hard, sweetheart. This is nothing. You need to develop some resilience, some toughness. Your mother is raising you to be too soft, too sensitive. Boys need to learn to push through discomfort. She stood up and began collecting plates, even though none of us had finished eating. I could see Ethan's relief at no longer having to struggle with his food. But the tension didn't ease. If anything, it ratcheted higher. Sarah, why don't you come help me with the dishes? My mother's voice was pleasant, but it wasn't really a question. Let Ethan explore the house a bit. He needs to learn to entertain himself. I hesitated, looking at Ethan. Will you be okay, buddy? He nodded, but his eyes said he didn't want to be left alone. I squeezed his shoulder and followed my mother into the kitchen, my stomach tight with worry. As soon as we were alone, she turned on me. You're suffocating him, Sarah. What? The way you hover over him. The way you cut his food. Answer questions for him. Let him hide behind you. You're raising him to be dependent. Weak. Is that what you want? A weak son? I want a happy son, I said, my hands shaking as I turned on the water to rinse the plates. I want him to feel loved and safe. Love and safety don't come from coddling. She handed me a plate, and I noticed her grip was tight, aggressive. They come from preparing a child for reality, the reality that the world is harsh and unforgiving, the reality that people will judge him, criticize him, reject him. Better he learns that from family, in a controlled environment, than from strangers who won't care about his feelings. You think hurting his feelings is helping him? I think toughening him up is helping him. She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. You were too sensitive as a child, too. You cried over everything. I had to teach you to be stronger, and you resented me for it. But look at you now. You survived, didn't you? Survived. The word echoed in my head. Was that the standard? Survival? Was that supposed to be enough? I heard a sound from the other room, a soft gasp. Then nothing. Then Ethan's voice, confused. Is this okay to touch, Grandma? But my mother was still here in the kitchen with me. Ethan was alone out there. I was starting to move toward the doorway when I heard it. A scream. High, terrified, full of pain. I dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered in the sink, but I was already running, my heart in my throat, adrenaline flooding my system. I burst into the hallway and saw Ethan standing next to my mother's vanity table, the one she kept in the hallway outside her bedroom. He was holding his arm out, his face contorted in agony. It burns. It burns, Mommy! I ran to him, grabbing him, pulling him close. His arm from wrist to elbow was bright, angry red. There were streaks on his neck. His cheek was already starting to blister. The smell hit me then, sharp and chemical and wrong. Chili oil. I recognized it because my mother kept a bottle in her kitchen that she used sparingly in her cooking. But this was different. This was concentrated, pure, meant to hurt. What happened? I was nearly screaming. Baby, what happened? He sobbed. I just wanted to see the pretty bottle. It had gold on it. I picked it up, and Grandma, she said I shouldn't touch her things without asking, and then she put something on my arm and it started burning, and I tried to be tough like she said, but it really, really hurts, Mommy. I looked up and saw my mother standing in the doorway, perfectly calm, holding a small bottle of chili oil. Her expression was not apologetic. It was not concerned. It was satisfied. What did you do? My voice didn't sound like mine. It was low, dangerous, barely controlled. I taught him a lesson. She set the bottle down on the vanity table with deliberate care. He touched my Florentine moisturizer, the one I imported from Italy. It cost $300. Children need to learn that actions have consequences. I couldn't process what I was hearing, couldn't make sense of it. My son was screaming in pain, and my mother was standing there talking about the price of moisturizer. You hurt him. The words came out flat, shocked. You deliberately hurt him. I corrected him. She smoothed her hair, checking her reflection in the vanity mirror. He needs to learn boundaries. He needs to learn respect. You've obviously failed to teach him these things, so I had to step in. You should be thanking me. Thanking you? Yes. She turned to face me fully, her expression cool and rational. I raised you, Sarah. I know what works. Pain is an excellent teacher. It creates clear associations. Touch something you're not supposed to. Experience discomfort. It's basic behavioral conditioning. Ethan won't touch other people's expensive things again. I can guarantee you that. I was holding Ethan, and he was sobbing into my neck, his small body shaking. The smell of chili oil was everywhere, chemical and burning. I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. Mom, I said, and my voice was shaking now, you rubbed chili oil on a 6-year-old child. You caused him pain on purpose. Do you understand how insane that is? I'm not insane. She looked genuinely offended. I'm practical. I'm doing what needs to be done because you won't. Do you know how I learned not to touch hot stoves? My mother let me touch one. Once. I never did it again. You, on the other hand, she pointed at me, I had to tell you 100 times not to touch things, and you never listened. You were willful and disobedient. But Ethan, he's smart. He'll learn quickly. He's 6, I repeated, because it seemed important. Seemed like something that should matter. He's a child. Children explore. Children are curious. That's normal. That's healthy. What's unhealthy is raising a child who thinks the world will accommodate his curiosity. She moved closer, and I instinctively backed up, putting myself between her and Ethan. The real world doesn't care if he's curious. The real world will hurt him far worse than a little chili oil if he doesn't learn to respect boundaries. I'm preparing him for reality. This isn't reality. This is abuse. The word hung in the air between us. I'd said it. Finally, after 32 years of tiptoeing around the truth, I'd said it out loud. My mother's face hardened. Don't you dare use that word in my house. I have never abused anyone. I have disciplined. I have taught. I have prepared. Everything I've done has been for your own good, and now for Ethan's good. If you can't see that, then you're even more ungrateful than I thought. Ethan was still crying, his tears hot against my neck. I need to run cold water on his arm. I need to help him. Fine. Do what you need to do. But don't you dare come in here acting like I'm the villain when I'm the only one trying to raise that boy properly. She turned away, dismissing us. And by the way, I did far worse to you when you were his age, and you turned out fine. I started walking toward the bathroom, Ethan in my arms, but her words stopped me cold. What did you say? You heard me. She didn't even turn around. When you were 7, you broke my favorite vase. Do you remember? I made you kneel on rice for 2 hours. You cried and cried, said your knees hurt, but you never broke anything of mine again, did you? And when you were 5, and you wouldn't eat your vegetables, I made you sit at that table until midnight. You tried to fall asleep, but I kept waking you up. You ate your vegetables after that. And when you talked back to me in front of my friends when you were 9, I made you stand in the corner, facing the wall for 6 hours. No bathroom breaks, no water. You learned respect that day. The memories came flooding back, things I'd buried or tried to reframe or convinced myself weren't that bad. But they were that bad. They had always been that bad. The kneeling on rice until my knees bled, the forced meals that made me throw up, the public humiliations, the physical punishments disguised as discipline, the constant criticism and control. "And you turned out fine," she repeated. "You're functional. You have a job. You're raising a child. See? My methods work." I stared at her back. This woman who'd given birth to me, who'd raised me, who'd shaped my entire childhood with her cruelty that she called love. "I didn't turn out fine," I said quietly. "I have anxiety. I have trust issues. I can't sleep. I second-guess every decision I make. I feel like I'm never good enough. I'm terrified of making mistakes. And I'm standing here, at 32 years old, still desperate for your approval even though I know I'll never get it. That's not fine, Mom. That's damaged." She finally turned around, and her face was cold. "You're weak, Sarah. That's your problem. You've always been weak. Too emotional. Too sensitive. I tried to make you stronger, and you resented me for it. And now you're raising your son to be weak too. But I won't let that happen. I won't watch another generation in this family fail because someone was too soft to do what needed to be done. We're leaving." The words came out clear and final. "Oh, here we go." She rolled her eyes. The dramatic exit. "How many times have we done this dance, Sarah? You storm out, you avoid me for a few weeks, then you come crawling back because you need money or babysitting or some kind of help. You always come back. Not this time. We'll see." She smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. "You'll be back. You need me more than you want to admit. And deep down, you know I'm right. You know everything I've done has been for your own good." I carried Ethan to the bathroom and ran cold water over his arm. He was still crying, but quieter now, exhausted from the pain. I grabbed a clean hand towel and soaked it in cold water, wrapping it gently around his burns. His skin was so red, so inflamed. In some places, it was already blistering. "We have to go to the hospital," I whispered to him. "We need to make sure you're okay." "Okay, Mommy." I carried him out of the bathroom and headed straight for the front door. My mother was standing in the living room, watching us with her arms crossed. "You're overreacting," she called out. "It's just a little irritation. It'll fade in a few hours." I didn't respond. I didn't look at her. I just carried my son out of that house and got him into the car as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Ethan was still crying softly in the back seat. "I'm sorry, Mommy. I shouldn't have touched Grandma's things. I'm sorry I made her mad. I had to pull over. I couldn't see through my tears." I got out and opened the back door, sliding in next to him and pulling him onto my lap as gently as I could. "Listen to me," I said, holding his face in my hands, looking directly into his eyes. "You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing. You're a little boy. You're supposed to be curious. You're supposed to want to explore and touch things and learn about the world. What Grandma did was wrong. Not you, her. Do you understand? But she said I needed to learn. No, baby. What you need to learn is that people who love you should never hurt you. People who love you should keep you safe. And what Grandma did wasn't love. It was never love." He nodded, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. He was too young to understand that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. I drove to the urgent care clinic across town, the one that stayed open late. The wait was long, almost 2 hours, and Ethan sat on my lap the whole time, occasionally whimpering when his arm hurt. I kept the wet towel wrapped around it, changing it out every few minutes to keep it cold. When we finally saw a doctor, her face went pale as she examined Ethan's arm. "How did this happen?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "His grandmother rubbed chili oil on him." I said it clearly, not trying to hide anything, as punishment for touching her belongings. The doctor looked at me for a long moment, then back at Ethan. "Honey, I'm going to need to take some pictures of your arm, okay? And I'm going to give you some medicine to help with the pain." She stepped out of the room, and I heard her speaking in low tones to the nurse. When she came back, she had paperwork. "I need to document this," she said gently, "for his medical records. And I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse." "It wasn't me," I said quickly. "I would never." "I know." She put a hand on my shoulder. "I can see that. But what happened to him needs to be reported. Do you understand?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Will they take him from me?" "No. If anything, they'll help you protect him." She looked at me seriously. "Has this person hurt him before?" "Not like this. But she's..." I struggled for words. She's been cruel, emotionally cruel, to both of us, for a long time. The doctor nodded. I'm going to give you cream for his burns and some pain medication, but I'm also going to give you some phone numbers. For support services. For legal help if you need it. Because what happened today, that's assault. Whether it came from family or a stranger, it's assault. After we left the clinic, I drove home in a daze. It was past midnight when we finally walked into our apartment. I got Ethan into his pajamas as carefully as I could, applied the cream the doctor had given us, and gave him the pain medication. He was so exhausted he fell asleep almost immediately, his arm wrapped in clean gauze, his face still streaked with dried tears. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at my phone. There were 7 missed calls from my mother, 12 text messages. I opened them with shaking hands. You're being ridiculous. He's fine. I checked. Stop overreacting and bring him back. You're going to regret this. I raised you better than to disrespect me like this. You're turning my grandson against me. Fine. Don't come crying to me when you need help. And then, at 2 a.m, the one that had woken me. You should thank me. Now he'll learn to respect what's valuable. I stared at that message, reading it over and over. She genuinely believed she'd done the right thing. She genuinely thought hurting my child was an act of love, of teaching, of preparation for the real world. And the scariest part was, a small voice in my head, the voice that had been trained by 32 years of her conditioning, whispered that maybe she was right. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional. Then I looked at my phone's photo gallery. The pictures I'd taken at the clinic. Ethan's small arm, red and blistered. His tear-stained face. The medical report with words like chemical burn and deliberate infliction. No, I wasn't overreacting. I was finally reacting appropriately. I started typing a response to her message, my fingers moving fast and angry. You're a monster. You hurt my child. You will never see him again. You will never touch him again. I hope you rot in that big empty house with all your expensive things that matter more to you than people. But I didn't send it. Instead, I deleted every word and wrote something simpler. Don't contact us again. Her response came within seconds. Or what, you'll call the police? Go ahead. I'm his grandmother. I have rights. You think they'll take your word over mine? You think anyone will believe that I'd hurt him? Look at my house. Look at my life. I'm respected in this community. You're a single mother in a low-income apartment with a history of instability. Who do you think they'll believe? The threat was clear and terrifying. Because she was probably right. She had money, connections, a pristine reputation. I had nothing but the truth, and the truth didn't always win. I took screenshots of every message. I saved them in 3 different places, backed them up to the cloud. I started a document, and I wrote down everything I could remember from the day. Every word she'd said, every action she'd taken, the timeline, the details, the witnesses, the doctor, the nurse, anyone who'd seen Ethan's injuries. Then I did something I'd never had the courage to do before. I called my Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister. It was 2:30 a.m, but I didn't care. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice groggy. Sarah? What's wrong? Is everything okay? No, nothing's okay. And I told her everything. Not just about today, but about my entire childhood. The rice, the forced meals, the humiliation, the constant criticism. And then about Ethan, about what my mother had done to him, about the burns and the hospital and the threats. Linda was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, in a voice thick with tears, I knew. God help me, Sarah, I knew she was hard on you. But I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that maybe her methods were just old-fashioned, that you seemed okay. But this, hurting Ethan, that's different. I can't. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't do more. Do you believe me? I asked, because I needed to hear it. Yes, I believe you. And I'll testify to it if you need me to. I've seen things over the years, heard things. I've kept quiet for too long. Not anymore. We talked for another hour. Linda told me stories I'd never heard, things my mother had done to other family members, other children, a pattern of control and cruelty that stretched back decades. She gave me names, phone numbers, people who might be willing to come forward. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not a lot of it, just a small flicker. But it was enough. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face going to the office, couldn't pretend everything was normal. Instead, I called my friend Jason. We'd gone to college together back when I'd had dreams of finishing my degree. He'd gone on to law school, was now a successful family attorney. We'd stayed friends over the years, meeting for coffee every few months, and he was one of the few people who'd met my mother and immediately seen through her charm. "Jason, I need help," I said when he answered. "And I need it now. Tell me everything." So I did, and when I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah," he finally said, his voice serious. "What she did is assault. It's child abuse. We can absolutely pursue this legally. But I need you to understand something. These cases are hard, especially when it's family, especially when the abuser is well respected, especially when there's no prior CPS involvement. The burden of proof is high. I have proof. The medical records, the photos, the doctor's report. That's good. That's really good. But your mother will have a defense. She'll say it was an accident, or that she was trying to teach him a lesson in a misguided way but didn't mean to hurt him, or that you're exaggerating for custody reasons even though there's no custody dispute. She'll make herself look sympathetic. She'll make you look vindictive. So what do? We build a case. We document everything, every interaction, every message, every threat. We gather witness statements from anyone who's seen her behavior. We establish a pattern, and we file for a restraining order. That's the first step. Will it work? Jason hesitated. I won't lie to you. It might not. Judges are often reluctant to completely cut off grandparent access, especially when the grandparent seems respectable. But we have one thing on our side. Those burns are severe. The medical report is damning, and your mother admitted to it in text messages. That's more than most abuse cases have. Okay, I took a deep breath. What do I need to do? First, don't respond to any more of her messages. Save everything she sends, but don't engage. Second, I'm going to put you in touch with a social worker who specializes in family trauma. You and Ethan need support. Third, we start gathering evidence. I'll draw up the paperwork for the restraining order. And fourth, he paused, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly. Your mother is going to fight back, and she's going to fight dirty. I know, but I have to do this. I have to protect him. I know you do, and I'm going to help you. The next few days were a blur of activity. I met with the social worker, a kind woman named Maria who worked with children who'd experienced trauma. She talked to Ethan gently, asked him about his feelings, helped him understand that what happened wasn't his fault. I watched my son open up to her in a way he hadn't been able to with me, and it broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. I contacted the people Linda had given me names for. A cousin who'd witnessed my mother's treatment of me at family gatherings. An old neighbor who'd called the police once when she heard my mother screaming at me. A former teacher who'd kept notes about my mother's volatile behavior during parent-teacher conferences. One by one, they agreed to provide statements. Meanwhile, my mother's messages continued. They evolved through stages. First anger. How dare you ignore me? I'm your mother. Then bargaining. Can we please talk about this like adults? I miss my grandson. Then guilt. I sacrificed everything for you and this is how you repay me? Then threats. You're making a big mistake. I will not be disrespected like this. I saved them all. Jason said they were helping our case, showing a pattern of manipulation and emotional abuse. A week after the incident, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something made me open it. Miss Hartwell, this is Detective Miller. I'm a private investigator. I was contacted by someone who knows your mother and is concerned about her behavior. I have information that might be useful to you. Would you be willing to meet? I showed the message to Jason. He said to be careful, but that it might be worth hearing what she had to say. So I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop the following afternoon. Detective Miller was in her 50s, with gray streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. She was wearing jeans and a blazer, and she had the air of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's dark side but hadn't lost her compassion. Thank you for meeting me, she said, as we sat down with our coffees. I know this must be overwhelming for you. Who hired you? I asked. A friend of your mother's. She held up a hand. And before you ask, I can't give you their name. They want to remain anonymous. But they reached out because they've been watching your mother's social media activity, and they're disturbed by what they're seeing. More than that, they've had concerns about her behavior for years. What kind of concerns? She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, statements, old police reports. I started reading, my hands shaking. There was a report from 15 years ago. A neighbor had called the police, reporting sounds of a child screaming. The police had come to our house. I remembered that day. I'd been 17, and my mother had been furious with me for getting a B on a chemistry test. She'd grabbed my hair and slammed my head against the kitchen counter. The police had talked to her. She'd been charming, apologetic, explained that I'd been throwing a teenage tantrum and she'd been trying to discipline me. They'd looked at me, and I'd been too scared to contradict her. They'd left. There was a statement from a former neighbor describing multiple incidents of hearing children crying and my mother's raised voice. There was a note from a teacher who'd been concerned about my weight loss and anxiety in middle school. There was a statement from a cousin who'd witnessed my mother twist my arm hard enough to leave bruises at a family wedding. I sat there, reading through my own history, my own trauma, documented by strangers who'd cared enough to notice but not enough to truly intervene. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because your mother has spent your entire life convincing people that she's the victim, that she's the misunderstood mother with the ungrateful daughter. And now she's starting to do the same thing with what happened to Ethan. I've seen her social media posts, the subtle martyrdom, the hints that you're keeping her grandson from her unfairly. She's building a narrative." Detective Miller leaned forward. "This folder is the truth. It's a pattern of behavior spanning decades. It won't make it into court. Most of it is too old or too circumstantial, but it will help you understand that you're not crazy, that what you experienced was real. And it might help your attorney build a stronger case for that restraining order." "Who's the person who hired you?" I asked again. "Why would they do this for me?" "All I can tell you is that there's someone who cares about the truth more than they care about family loyalty. Someone who's carried guilt for a long time about not speaking up sooner. They wanted you to have this information because they believe you're finally strong enough to use it." I took the folder home and read through it again that night, after Ethan was asleep. Every document, every statement, every piece of evidence that my childhood hadn't been normal, that my mother's treatment of me hadn't been love. I cried, not just for myself but for the little girl I'd been, the one who'd thought she deserved the cruelty because she wasn't good enough, smart enough, obedient enough. Jason incorporated some of the information into our filing, the parts that were recent enough and documented enough to be relevant. We filed for the restraining order 3 weeks after the incident. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, my mother escalated. She started showing up at my apartment. I didn't answer the door, but I documented every visit. She sent gifts for Ethan through delivery services, expensive toys and clothes with notes that said "Grandma loves you and misses you." I photographed them and sent them back. She posted on social media, carefully crafted messages that made her look like the victim, so heartbroken to be separated from my grandson. Family is everything, but sometimes love isn't enough when others build walls. Praying for reconciliation. Her friends responded with sympathy. "So sorry you're going through this. You're such a good grandmother. Kids these days don't understand respect." I watched it all from a distance, feeling like I was watching a performance. She was so good at it, so skilled at making herself look sympathetic while making me look cruel, and it worked. People I barely knew sent me messages asking why I was keeping Ethan from his grandmother. Old family friends called my phone, leaving voicemails about how disappointed they were in me. But then something unexpected happened. I got a message on Facebook from someone I didn't know. I almost deleted it, but the first line caught my eye. "I grew up with your mother. I need to tell you something." The message was from a woman named Catherine, who'd lived on my mother's street when they were both children. She said she'd seen my mother's recent posts and felt compelled to reach out. She described my mother as a child, as a teenager. The cruelty even then, the need for control, the way she'd hurt her own younger siblings and made it look like accidents or discipline. She described my grandmother, my mother's mother, as cold and demanding, setting impossible standards that my mother could never meet. "I don't know if this helps," Catherine wrote, "but I wanted you to know that your mother was taught to be the way she is. Her own mother was cruel to her. That doesn't excuse what she's done to you and your son, but it might help you understand that this is a cycle that's been going on for generations. You have a chance to break it. Please, for your son's sake, be strong enough to do what no one in your family has done before." I wrote back, thanking her. And then I made a decision. I was going to break the cycle. Whatever it took. The day before the hearing, my mother sent one final message. "Last chance, Sarah. Drop this restraining order nonsense and bring Ethan to visit. We can move past this." I'll forgive you for overreacting. I'll even apologize to Ethan if that's what you need. But if you go through with this hearing, I will make your life hell. I will fight for grandparent visitation rights. I will tell everyone what a terrible mother you are. I will make sure you regret ever crossing me. I showed it to Jason. He smiled grimly. Please tell me you're saving this. Every word. Good. Because she just threatened you. In writing. That's going to look great in front of the judge. The hearing was held in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. My mother arrived dressed impeccably, in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my rent. She looked like a respectable grandmother, her hair styled, her makeup subtle, her jewelry expensive but not flashy. She smiled at the judge, at the bailiff, at everyone except me. I was wearing the same black slacks and cream blouse I'd worn to her house that day. It was the nicest outfit I owned. Next to her, I looked exactly like what she'd always said I was: poor, unsophisticated, struggling. But then Jason stood up and presented our case. He submitted the medical records, showing chemical burns consistent with chili oil exposure. He submitted the photos of Ethan's injuries, careful to keep his face covered for privacy. He submitted my mother's text messages, including the ones where she admitted to putting chili oil on Ethan, and the recent one where she'd threatened me. He submitted the doctor's statement, the nurse's observations, the social worker's assessment. Then he called me to testify. I sat in that chair, my hands shaking, and I told my story. Not just about that day, but about my whole life. About the rice, about the forced meals, about the constant criticism and control. About how I'd brought Ethan to see his grandmother despite my reservations because I'd wanted him to have family, and how she'd hurt him deliberately, admittedly, as a form of discipline. My mother's attorney tried to paint me as bitter, as exaggerating, as seeking revenge for imagined childhood slights. But Jason was ready. He brought in the witness statements. My Aunt Linda, testifying about things she'd seen and ignored. The old neighbor, talking about the times she'd heard concerning sounds from our house. The teacher who'd kept notes about my anxiety and weight loss. And then, most damning of all, he played a video. I hadn't known about it until that morning. Jason had subpoenaed footage from the security camera at the urgent care clinic. It showed me carrying Ethan in, his arm wrapped in a towel, both of us crying. It showed his face, terrified and in pain. It showed the doctor's reaction when she unwrapped his arm, the way her professional composure slipped for just a moment. The video ran for 3 minutes. It felt like an eternity. When it ended, the courtroom was silent. Then, my mother took the stand, and I watched her perform. She was brilliant, I had to admit. She cried at the right moments. She expressed remorse, saying she'd only wanted to teach her grandson about boundaries, that she'd never intended for him to be hurt so badly, that the chili oil must have been stronger than she realized. She talked about how much she loved us, how devastated she was to be separated from her only grandchild. She made it sound like a tragic misunderstanding, like an accident she deeply regretted. But then Jason cross-examined her, and he was relentless. He read her text messages out loud, the ones where she'd justified her actions, where she'd said Ethan needed to learn, where she'd compared what she'd done to how she'd raised me. He asked her directly, "Did you or did you not deliberately apply chili oil to a 6-year-old child's skin as a form of punishment?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw her realize her mistake. If she said no, she was calling me a liar and contradicting her own text messages. If she said yes, she was admitting to child abuse. I was trying to teach him a valuable lesson, she finally said, about respecting other people's property. I may have been too harsh, but my intentions were good. So yes, Jason said, you deliberately hurt him. Not accidentally. Deliberately. She faltered. I was disciplining him. By causing chemical burns that required medical treatment. It wasn't that serious. Jason pulled out the medical report and read aloud. 2nd-degree chemical burns covering approximately 30 square inches of skin, blistering and severe inflammation. Requiring prescription pain medication and topical antibiotics to prevent infection. Patient exhibited signs of acute distress and trauma. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd been listening with an inscrutable expression throughout the hearing, leaned forward. "Miss Hartwell," she said to my mother, "I've been on the bench for 23 years. I've seen a lot of cases involving family conflict, grandparent rights, discipline disputes. And I can tell you that what's described here goes far beyond any reasonable definition of discipline. You caused a child significant physical pain and injury. You have justified that action as teaching. You have shown no genuine remorse, only regret for the consequences you're now facing. She looked down at the paperwork in front of her. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting the restraining order. You are prohibited from contacting Sarah Hartwell or Ethan Hartwell directly or indirectly for a period of no less than 3 years. At that time, Miss Hartwell may choose to revisit the order if she wishes, but you will have no automatic right to do so. You are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of their residence, Ethan's school, or any place you know them to be. If you violate this order, you will be subject to arrest and prosecution. Do you understand? My mother's face had gone pale. Her hands were shaking. This is, she started. You can't. I'm his grandmother. I can and I have. The judge's voice was firm. And let me be clear, if you had shown genuine remorse, if you had taken responsibility for your actions without justification, I might have considered a more lenient order with supervised visitation. But your testimony today, your text messages, your continued insistence that what you did was appropriate discipline, all of that tells me that you pose an ongoing risk to this child. My primary concern is his safety, and he is not safe with you. The gavel came down, and it was over. I walked out of that courtroom, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt free. Not happy, exactly. There was too much sadness, too much grief for what might have been, but free. The weight I'd been carrying for 32 years, the constant anxiety about pleasing her, about avoiding her criticism, about protecting Ethan from her while still trying to maintain a relationship, all of it was gone. Jason put a hand on my shoulder. You did good in there. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you think. That night, after I'd picked up Ethan from Rachel's house and made him dinner and helped him with his bath, I sat with him on his bed. His arm was healing well, the redness fading, the blisters starting to scab over. He'd have scars, the doctor said, but they'd fade with time. Buddy, I need to talk to you about Grandma. He looked at me with those big, serious eyes. Okay, you're not going to see her anymore. Not for a long time. Maybe not ever. A judge decided that Grandma can't visit us because she hurt you. And I know that might be confusing, because she's family and she's my mom. But sometimes, even people who are supposed to love us don't know how to love us in healthy ways. And when that happens, we have to protect ourselves. Is she mad at me? Oh, baby. No. I pulled him into my lap, careful of his arm. She's not mad at you. This isn't about you at all. This is about her choices, about things she did that were wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. Not that day, not ever. Okay. He leaned against me, and I could feel him relaxing. I don't want to see her anyway. She scared me. I know, and you never have to. I'm going to keep you safe. That's my job. That's what moms do. The next few weeks were strange, quiet. I kept expecting my mother to show up, to find some loophole in the restraining order, to launch some new attack. But she didn't. Her social media went silent. Her calls stopped. It was like she'd vanished. Then I got a call from Aunt Linda. Sarah, she said, her voice worried. Have you heard from your mother? No. The restraining order says she can't contact me. I know, but I'm worried. She's not answering my calls. I went by her house yesterday and all the curtains are drawn. Her car's in the driveway, but she won't come to the door. Linda, she's fine. She's probably just embarrassed about what happened at the hearing. She'll reach out when she's ready. But Linda's concern stayed with me. And a week later, I got a call from one of my mother's neighbors. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said, but I saw your mother today, and she paused, unwell. She was in her bathrobe at 3 p.m. Her yard is overgrown, which is so unlike her. I just thought someone in the family should know. I didn't want to care. I wanted to feel nothing. But there was still a small part of me, the daughter part, that worried. So I asked Linda to do a wellness check. To go to the house, make sure my mother was okay, make sure she wasn't doing anything dangerous. Linda called me that evening. She's not okay, Sarah. The house is a mess. There are dishes piled up, trash everywhere. She's lost weight. She looks like she hasn't slept in days. She just sits in that living room, surrounded by all those expensive things, and she stares at nothing. Is she hurting herself? Not physically. But I think she's falling apart. Everything she built, her image, her reputation, it's all crumbled. People know what she did. They're not taking her calls. Her church asked her to step down from the committee she was on. She's isolated herself completely. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me felt vindicated. She'd hurt me, She'd hurt my son, and now she was facing consequences. But another part of me just felt sad. Not for her, exactly, but for the whole situation. For the wasted years, the missed opportunities, the family we could have been if she'd been capable of real love. "What do you want me to do?" Linda asked. "Make sure she eats. Make sure she's safe. Get her into therapy if she'll go. But don't tell her I asked you to check on her. I can't," I swallowed hard. "I can't be the one who saves her from this. She has to save herself, I understand." A month passed, then two. Spring turned into summer. Ethan's burns healed into faint pink lines that the doctor said would fade further with time. He started first grade at a new school, one across town where my mother didn't know the address. He made friends easily, played soccer at recess, brought home paintings covered in bright colors and unrestrained joy. I started going to therapy myself, working through the decades of damage. My therapist, a gentlewoman named Dr. Reeves, helped me understand that healing wasn't linear, that I could simultaneously grieve the mother I'd never had and feel relief at her absence from my life. One evening, while I was making dinner, Ethan asked, "Do you miss Grandma?" I thought about it carefully. I miss the idea of her. I miss what I wanted her to be. But I don't miss how she actually was. Does that make sense? I think so. He was coloring at the kitchen table, using his left hand without any self-consciousness. "Sometimes I wish I had a nice grandma. Like Marcus does. His grandma bakes cookies and reads him stories and she's funny. Maybe someday we'll find you someone like that." There are lots of older people who don't have grandkids nearby and would love to have someone to bake cookies for. We could look into a grandparent volunteer program. Really? Really? That would be cool. He went back to his coloring, and I watched him. This resilient, beautiful child who'd been through so much but was still capable of joy and hope and love. 3 months after the hearing, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my mother, sent through her attorney, so it didn't violate the restraining order. Jason read it first, to make sure it wasn't threatening. It wasn't. It was just sad. "Sarah," it read, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I even deserve forgiveness. I've spent these months alone, really alone for the first time in my life, and I've had to face some hard truths about myself. My therapist, yes, I'm in therapy now, as mandated by the court but also because I realize I need it, says I have issues with control and perfectionism that stem from my own childhood. She says I've been repeating patterns I learned from my own mother. She says I've hurt you in ways I still don't fully understand. I want you to know that I'm working on it. I'm trying to understand why I did the things I did, why I thought they were acceptable. I'm trying to understand what real love looks like versus control disguised as love. It's hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm not asking to see Ethan. I know I don't deserve that, and I know he's better off without me right now. Maybe forever. I'm not even asking to see you. I'm just asking you to know that I'm trying to change, that I recognize I was wrong, that what I did to him, and to you throughout your childhood, was abuse. There, I've said it. The word I've been avoiding. Abuse. I don't know if that helps you at all. Maybe it just makes things worse. But I needed you to hear it from me. You were right. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Even if you never respond to this letter, even if I never see you or Ethan again, I hope you build a beautiful life. I hope you find happiness. I hope Ethan grows up strong and kind and free from the patterns that have haunted our family for generations. You're breaking the cycle, Sarah. You're doing what I never had the courage to do. And for that, if nothing else, I'm proud of you. I sat with that letter for a long time, reading it over and over. Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to hope that maybe, finally, she was capable of change. But Dr. Reeves had warned me about this. People like my mother, people with deep-seated patterns of control and abuse, rarely changed. And even if they did, it wasn't my responsibility to be there to witness it or support it or validate it. I never wrote back. I filed the letter away, and I continued building the life I wanted. 6 months after the hearing, Ethan and I moved. Not far, just to a different neighborhood with a little more space, a little more light. We found a small house with a yard where Ethan could play, with enough room for a garden. I got a new job at a community center working with at-risk youth, helping kids navigate difficult family situations. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was meaningful work, and I felt like I was turning my own trauma into something useful, something healing. Ethan thrived in his new school. His teacher told me he was kind to other kids, especially the ones who seemed sad or left out. "He has a lot of empathy," she said. "You're raising a really good human." Those words meant more to me than anything. A year after the restraining order, Rachel asked me if I'd ever consider letting my mother back into my life if she really had changed, if she kept up with therapy, if she could prove she was different. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe someday, but not now, not for a long time, because even if she's changed, I've changed too. I've built a life without her, and it's a good life. It's peaceful. And I'm not willing to risk that peace. Not for Ethan and not for myself. Rachel nodded. That makes sense. You deserve peace. And I did. I finally believed that. 2 years after that day in my mother's house, Ethan and I took a trip to the beach. It was just the two of us, a small vacation I'd saved up for. We stayed in a tiny rental cottage with chipping paint and creaky floors, but it had a porch that overlooked the ocean, and that was all that mattered. On our last evening there, we sat on that porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange and purple, and the waves rolled in with a rhythm that felt like breathing. Ethan was leaning against me, his arm, now completely healed except for a few faint white lines, resting on the porch railing. "Mom?" he asked. "Do you think Grandma thinks about us?" "Probably." "Do you think she's sorry?" "I think she might be." But being sorry doesn't always mean things can go back to how they were. Sometimes people hurt us too much for sorry to be enough. He thought about that for a moment. That makes sense, I guess. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the seagulls and the waves. I thought about my mother, alone in her big house with all her expensive things. I wondered if she was still in therapy, if she was still trying to change, if she was capable of genuine self-reflection. But mostly, I thought about this moment. My son beside me, healthy and happy and free. The ocean stretching out before us, infinite and wild. The future spreading out ahead of us, full of possibility. This was my revenge, I realized. Not the restraining order, though that had been necessary. Not the public exposure of who she really was, though there was a kind of justice in that. Not even her isolation and regret, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in knowing she was facing consequences. No, my real revenge was this: building a life so full of peace and love that she had no place in it. Building a childhood for my son so different from my own that he would never understand why someone would hurt a child for being curious, for using the wrong hand, for being human. Building a version of myself that didn't need her approval or validation, or even her acknowledgement. I'd taken from her the one thing she'd always been able to count on: my compliance, my desperation for her love, my willingness to accept crumbs and call them a feast. And in the space where her toxicity used to live, I'd planted something new. A life where mistakes were learning opportunities, not punishments. Where love came without conditions. Where gentle wasn't the same as weak. Where Ethan could be exactly who he was without fear. That night, after I'd tucked Ethan into bed in our little beach cottage, I sat on the porch alone and wrote a letter I would never send. "Mom, I've spent 2 years thinking about what I wanted to say to you. I've written this letter 100 times in my head, and it's always different. Sometimes it's angry. Sometimes it's sad. Sometimes it's surprisingly compassionate. Tonight, it's just honest. You wanted to teach me about strength through pain. You wanted to prepare me for a hard world. But here's what you actually taught me. I learned that survival isn't the same as living. I learned that being afraid of making mistakes is not the same as being disciplined. I learned that control is not the same as love. And most importantly, I learned exactly the kind of parent I didn't want to be. So thank you, in a strange way. Thank you for being so destructive that leaving became not just an option but a necessity. Thank you for being so certain you were right that you couldn't see how wrong you were. Thank you for hurting my son, because that was the final push I needed to break free from 32 years of conditioning. You thought you were toughening us up, but you were just showing us exactly what we needed to escape from. I don't hate you. Hate requires too much energy, and I have better things to do with mine. I don't even think about you most days anymore. And that's probably the truest sign that I've healed. I hope you find peace someday. I hope you break your own cycles. I hope you learn what real love looks like, but I won't be there to see it, and I won't be there to validate it. Because the best revenge isn't making you suffer. It's making sure you can never make us suffer again. You taught me what I didn't want to be, and maybe that's the only lesson that mattered. I saved the letter in a file on my computer, knowing I'd never send it but needing to write it anyway. Then I closed my laptop and went back out to the porch. The ocean was dark now, just the sound of waves and the distant lights of boats on the horizon. I breathed in the salt air and felt something settle in my chest. Not closure exactly. There was no neat ending to this story. No moment where everything suddenly made sense and all the pain was worth it. But there was this. A quiet evening by the ocean, with my son sleeping peacefully in the next room, no longer afraid, no longer trying to make himself small. There was a future stretching ahead of us that we got to build ourselves, without her influence, without her criticism, without her toxic version of love. The next morning, Ethan and I walked along the beach collecting shells. He found a perfect sand dollar, intact and white, and held it up to the sun like it was treasure. "Can we keep it, Mom?" "Of course we can." He put it carefully in the bucket we'd brought, then ran ahead to look for more. I watched him, this beautiful, resilient child who'd been hurt but hadn't been broken, who still saw beauty in small things, who still trusted the world to hold good things for him. We spent the whole day on that beach, building sandcastles and chasing waves and eating ice cream that melted faster than we could lick it. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. We got sunburned despite the sunscreen. We were completely, perfectly happy. That evening, as we packed up to leave, Ethan said, "This was the best vacation ever." "Yeah? What made it the best?" He thought about it seriously. "Everything. The beach and the shells and the ice cream. But mostly just us. Just you and me." I knelt down and hugged him, this child who'd taught me what real love looked like. "Just you and me," I agreed. "That's all we need." We drove home as the sun set, the radio playing softly, Ethan dozing in the back seat with his bucket of shells on his lap. I thought about the years ahead, all the moments we'd have together. First days of school and lost teeth and little league games. Homework help and bedtime stories and lazy Sunday mornings. A whole childhood, a whole life, built on a foundation of safety and love instead of fear and control. My mother would miss all of it. She'd miss watching her grandson grow up. She'd miss the chance to be part of our lives, to build real memories instead of painful ones, and that was her loss, her consequence, her lonely ending. But it was our freedom, our beginning, our chance to write a different story. 6 months after our beach trip, I got another letter from my mother's attorney. This one was different. It was formal, legal, final. She was relinquishing any claim to grandparent visitation rights. She was, in effect, walking away completely. The letter from her that was enclosed with the legal documents was short. "Sarah, I've come to understand that the kindest thing I can do for you and Ethan is to let you go. Not because I don't care, but because I care enough to recognize that my presence in your lives, even a reformed version of me, would always carry the weight of what I've done. You both deserve to live without that weight. I'm continuing therapy. I'm trying to understand and change the patterns that defined me. But that's my work to do, not yours to witness or support. Be happy. That's all I want now. Just be happy." I read the letter twice, then filed it away with the others. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and something that might have been forgiveness, though not the kind that required reconciliation. I told Dr. Reeves about it in our next session. "How do you feel about her giving up her rights?" she asked. "Free," I said. "Finally, completely free. Do you think you'll ever want to reconnect with her?" "I don't know. Maybe if Ethan asks about her when he's older, if he wants to know his grandmother, we can revisit it. But it would be his choice, not mine. And it would come with boundaries so strong they'd be like walls. That sounds healthy. The truth is," I continued, "I spent my whole life waiting for her to become the mother I needed, and she never did. She never could. And now I'm done waiting. I'm done hoping. I'm just done. What will you do instead?" "Live," I said simply. "Just live." And I did. We did. Ethan and I built a life that was ordinary in the best way. We had routines and traditions: pizza on Friday nights, library visits every Tuesday, Sunday morning pancakes where I let him crack the eggs even though half the shell always ended up in the bowl. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, but enough to show Ethan that relationships could be healthy and mutual and kind. I made friends with other single parents at his school, built a community of people who supported each other without judgment. I volunteered at the community center, working with teenagers who were navigating difficult family situations. I shared my story sometimes, when it seemed helpful, when I could see them struggling with the same guilt and confusion I'd felt. I told them it was okay to choose themselves. That loving someone didn't mean letting them hurt you. That family was supposed to be safe. One girl, 16 years old with bruises she tried to hide, asked me, "But what if no one believes me? What if they think I'm lying?" I looked her in the eyes and said, "I believe you, and I'll help you find other people who believe you too. You're not alone." Watching her face shift from despair to hope, I felt something settle in my chest. Purpose. Meaning. The transformation of my own pain into something that could help others. 3 years after the restraining order, on Ethan's 9th birthday, we had a party in our backyard. It was small, just his closest friends and their parents, Rachel and her kids, Jason and his wife. There was a bounce house and a piñata and way too much cake. I stood on the porch, watching Ethan laugh with his friends, his whole face lit up with joy, and Rachel came to stand beside me. "You did good," she said. "We did good," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you. Have you heard from her at all?" I shook my head. "No. And that's okay. Better than okay. No regrets?" I thought about it. Regrets? Maybe. I regret that Ethan doesn't have grandparents. I regret that I wasted so many years trying to earn love from someone who didn't know how to give it. I regret the childhood I had, the scars I carry. But I don't regret leaving. I don't regret protecting my son. I don't regret choosing us over her. Those aren't regrets. Those are the best decisions I ever made. Rachel put her arm around my shoulders. "You're stronger than you think you are." "I used to think strength meant enduring," I said. "Putting up with things, surviving things, pushing through pain." But I was wrong. Real strength is knowing when to walk away. Real strength is choosing peace over pain, even when it's hard, even when people don't understand, even when you feel guilty. That's very wise. It took me 32 years to learn it. I hope Ethan learns it faster. We watched the kids run around, their laughter filling the air. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in those beautiful colors that only happen in summer. Everything felt golden, perfect, like a moment suspended in time. Ethan ran up to me, breathless and beaming. "Mom, this is the best birthday ever!" "I'm so glad, buddy. Happy birthday." He hugged me tight, then ran back to his friends. I watched him go. This child who'd been hurt but had healed, who'd been scared but had found his courage again, who'd learned that love should feel safe. And I realized something profound. This moment, right here, was my revenge. Not the legal victory, not the public exposure, not my mother's isolation and regret. This ordinary, beautiful, peaceful moment in our ordinary, beautiful, peaceful life. I'd taken everything from her that mattered. Not her money or her reputation or her dignity, though she'd lost those too. I'd taken something far more valuable, the power to hurt us, the access to our lives, the ability to make us small and scared and desperate for her approval. And in the space where her toxicity had lived, I'd built something she could never touch. A life full of laughter and safety and unconditional love, a childhood for my son that was the opposite of mine, a version of myself that was whole and healed and strong. That was the revenge that mattered. Not destruction, but creation. Not her ending, but our beginning. As the party wound down and parents started collecting their kids, as the sun sank lower and the fireflies started to come out, I sat on the porch steps with Ethan. He was exhausted, leaning against me, his eyes half closed. "Did you have a good day?" I asked. "The best," he murmured. "Thanks, Mom." "You're welcome, baby. I love you so much." "Love you too." He fell asleep there, right on my lap, his breathing slow and steady. I sat holding him, watching the fireflies dance in the darkening yard, and I felt a peace so complete it almost hurt. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Linda. Saw Ethan's birthday pictures on Facebook. He looks so happy. You both do. I'm proud of you, Sarah. So proud. I typed back. Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For helping me. Her response came quickly. You did the hard part. You chose love over guilt. Not many people are brave enough to do that. I looked down at Ethan, sleeping peacefully in my arms, and I knew Linda was right. It had been hard. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. Choosing to walk away from my mother, to cut that tie, to build a life without her. But it had also been necessary. Essential. The only way forward. 4 years after that day in my mother's house, I got unexpected news. Aunt Linda called, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Your mother had a stroke. She's okay. She's going to recover. But it was serious. She's in the hospital. I felt a strange numbness. Is she going to be okay? Yes. They got her to the hospital quickly. She'll need rehabilitation, but she should make a full recovery. Does she want to see me? Linda was quiet for a moment. She asked if you'd been told. When I said yes, she said she understands if you don't want to come. She said, and Linda's voice broke. She said she doesn't deserve to see you, but she hopes you're well. I sat with that information, trying to figure out what I felt. Sadness, certainly, but not obligation, not guilt, not the overwhelming need to rush to her side that I would have felt years ago. I'm glad she's going to be okay, I said finally, but I'm not going to visit her. Is that terrible? No, honey, it's self-preservation. You get to make that choice. Will you tell her I hope she recovers, and that I mean that sincerely? I will. After I hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about my mother alone in that hospital bed. Part of me wondered if I should go, if this was the kind of moment where you're supposed to forgive and reconcile and have a heartwarming reunion. But I'd learned that life wasn't a movie. Real healing didn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looked like peaceful distance. Sometimes the healthiest thing you could do for everyone involved was maintain the boundaries you'd set. I told Dr. Reeves about it in our next session. I don't feel guilty, I said, almost surprised. I thought I would, but I don't. I feel sad that she's sick, but I don't feel obligated to go to her. Is that wrong? It's not wrong, it's honest. You've done the work to understand that loving someone from a distance is still a form of love, and choosing not to expose yourself or your son to someone who hurt you isn't cruelty. It's wisdom. She's probably scared, alone in that hospital, probably. But her being scared doesn't obligate you to comfort her. She made choices that led to this loneliness. Those consequences belong to her, not you. I nodded slowly. I've spent my whole life trying to save her from consequences, trying to make her happy, to be good enough, to earn her love. I'm done with that. How does that feel? Free, I said. It feels free. I didn't visit my mother in the hospital. I sent flowers, because that felt right, with a card that said, "Wishing you a full recovery." But I didn't go myself, and I didn't bring Ethan. Linda kept me updated on her recovery. She was doing well, working hard in physical therapy, slowly regaining her strength. And she never asked Linda to pressure me to visit. That, more than anything, told me she might actually be changing. The old version of my mother would have used her illness as a weapon, a way to manipulate me into coming back. 6 months later, I got a letter. Another one sent through her attorney, following the boundaries I'd set. It was longer this time, more thoughtful. Sarah, my stroke was a wake-up call in ways I didn't expect. Lying in that hospital bed, unable to speak clearly, unable to move the right side of my body, I had a lot of time to think about my life, about the choices I'd made, about the people I'd hurt. I thought about you, about Ethan, about all the moments I've missed because I was too proud, too damaged, too stuck in my patterns to change fast enough or completely enough. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I know I don't get to be part of your lives. I know I lost that right when I hurt Ethan, and honestly, I'd probably lost it long before that, with all the ways I hurt you. I'm writing this because I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see the damage I caused. I see the generational trauma I perpetuated instead of breaking. And I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that expects forgiveness or reconciliation. Just the kind of sorry that needed to be said. You were right to leave. You were right to protect your son. You were right about everything. I hope you're happy, Sarah. I hope you've built the kind of life I never gave you. I hope Ethan is thriving. I hope you've found peace. That's all I want now. Just for you to be okay. To be better than okay. To be happy. If you're ever ready to talk, I'll be here. But I understand if that day never comes. I truly do. Take care of yourself and that beautiful boy. I read the letter 3 times. It felt different from the others. Less defensive, more genuine. But I'd learned not to trust my mother's words. Words were easy. It was actions over time that mattered. I filed the letter away with the others. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe someday, years from now. If she continued to respect my boundaries, if she continued to work on herself, if Ethan asked about her, maybe we could have a conversation. But not today. Not this year. Maybe not ever. And I was okay with that uncertainty. 5 years after the restraining order expired, Ethan was 11. He was doing well in school, playing on a travel soccer team, learning guitar. He had friends and hobbies and a life full of the things kids should have. One evening, he asked me, "Do you think Grandma ever thinks about us?" "Probably," I said honestly. "I think she probably thinks about us a lot." "Do you think she's sorry?" "She says she is." "Do you believe her?" I thought about how to answer that. I think she's learned some things. I think she's changed in some ways. But sorry doesn't always mean things can go back to how they were. Sometimes people hurt us too deeply for sorry to fix it. Do you ever want to see her again? I don't know. I admitted. Maybe someday. But right now, I like our life the way it is. It feels safe and happy, and I'm not willing to risk that. He nodded thoughtfully. Me neither. I don't really remember her that much anymore. Just, sometimes I remember my arm hurting. And being scared. I'm sorry you have to remember that. It's okay. You kept me safe after that. That's what I remember more. My heart swelled with love for this kid. This amazing, resilient, emotionally intelligent kid. You're pretty wise for 11. He grinned. I learned from the best. Later that night, after he was asleep, I thought about his questions. Did I ever want to see my mother again? The honest answer was complicated. Part of me was curious about whether she really had changed. Part of me wanted to believe that reconciliation was possible, that we could have some kind of relationship. But a bigger part of me knew that it didn't matter. Even if she had changed completely, even if she'd become a different person, the damage was done. The memories were real. The scars, both visible and invisible, remained. And more importantly, I didn't need her anymore. I'd spent 3 decades of my life believing I couldn't be complete without her approval, without her love, without her validation. But I'd been wrong. I was whole without her, happy without her, at peace without her. That was the final revelation, the ultimate freedom. I didn't need my mother to acknowledge what she'd done for me to heal. I didn't need her to change for me to move forward. I didn't need her at all. And in that not needing, in that complete independence, I found something I'd been searching for my entire life. Myself, my own strength, my own worth. 7 years after that day in my mother's house, Ethan was 13. We were sitting on our porch, the same ritual we'd had since we moved to this house, watching the fireflies come out as the sun set. "Mom," he said suddenly, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I'm glad you protected me. I know it was hard to cut Grandma off. I know family is supposed to be important, but I'm glad you chose me over her." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Oh, buddy, that wasn't even a choice. You were always going to come first. Still, I know some parents don't do that. Marcus's mom still makes him see his dad even though his dad is mean to him. And Emma's parents make her spend time with her grandmother even though her grandmother says terrible things to her. But you didn't do that. You kept me safe." I pulled him into a hug. This almost teenager who was still, sometimes, my little boy. That's what parents are supposed to do. Keep their kids safe. Even from family. Especially from family sometimes. You're a good mom. You're a good kid. The best kid. We sat there, as the sky darkened, as the stars came out, as the neighborhood settled into its evening quiet, and I thought about all the ways our lives could have gone differently, if I'd stayed. If I'd continued to expose Ethan to my mother. If I'd let guilt and obligation override my instinct to protect him. But I hadn't. I'd made the hard choice. The right choice. And sitting here, 7 years later, with my healthy, happy, well-adjusted son beside me, I knew without any doubt that I'd do it all again. That night, I wrote one final letter. Not to my mother, but to myself. The myself from 7 years ago, sitting in that dark living room, terrified and uncertain, holding my crying son and wondering if I had the strength to walk away. "Dear Sarah," I wrote, "you're about to do the hardest thing you've ever done. You're going to walk away from your mother. You're going to choose your son over your need for her love. You're going to set boundaries that will make people uncomfortable and will make you feel guilty and will challenge everything you were taught about family and obligation. Do it anyway. Because 7 years from now, you'll be sitting on a porch with your 13-year-old son, and he'll be happy and healthy and whole. He'll tell you that he's glad you protected him. He'll thank you for choosing him, and you'll realize that this was never about revenge. Not really. It was about love, about learning what real love looks like, about breaking cycles and building something new." I saved the letter, knowing I'd never send it because I couldn't. But writing it felt like closing a circle, honoring the journey, acknowledging how far we'd come. So here's what I want you to know. Real revenge isn't about making someone else hurt. It's about refusing to keep hurting yourself. It's about building something so beautiful out of the ashes that they can't even touch it. It's about teaching your kids that they deserve better, and then showing them what better looks like. My mother taught me what I didn't want to be. And maybe that's the only lesson that mattered. Because in learning what not to do, I learned what to do instead. I learned to love without conditions, to discipline without cruelty, to guide without controlling, to be present without hovering, to set boundaries without guilt. I learned that being gentle isn't the same as being weak. That protecting your peace isn't the same as being selfish. That choosing yourself isn't the same as being ungrateful. And most importantly, I learned that breaking generational cycles isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation or giving endless chances. It's about having the courage to say enough, to walk away, to build something new. That's my revenge. Not destruction, but creation. Not her ending, but our beginning. Not making her suffer, but making sure she can never make us suffer again. And in the quiet of that realization, in the peace of this life we've built, I finally feel free. Have you ever had to cut someone out of your life to protect your peace? Have you ever realized that the person who was supposed to protect you was actually the one hurting you? Drop a comment and let me know. Let's remind each other that we're not alone in this. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest moments. Because you deserve to hear that you're not crazy, you're not too sensitive, and you're not wrong for choosing yourself. Your safety matters. Your peace matters. You matter.